Hey there, Salt Strong family. I hope this finds you all happy, healthy, and safe. In this video, I want to share with you a scouting trip that I did down in Goodland, Florida this past weekend. Now, I say scouting trip because this was supposed to be a fishing trip, but I had some mechanical issues and it turned into more paddling than it was fishing, so right to the report. So we started at the Goodland Bridge put-in for the kayaks. Now, if you've never been in this area, it's actually a pretty neat little place. There's plenty of parking. It's an easy access to get down to the water, although the ramp itself is a little bit rocky, so if you weren't able to carry your kayak by yourself, then make sure and have a cart that you can towed it down to the water, or like I had somebody help me carry the kayak down to the water. But you really don't want to drag it down. There's some rocks there, you might scratch the bottom of your kayak. But moving on, the plan was to cross the bay and go over to a place called Hell's Gate. We were going to go in there, and the targeted species was snook. We're going to see if we can find some around the points and the current and everything. But when I got there, my chain drive broke on my Hobie, so my paddles were out, and somebody, this guy, forgot to bring an anchor. So fishing was pretty much out in that area. The current was just ripping through there, and you really couldn't hold your spot and fish at the same time without either one of the two, the paddles or the anchor. So we moved out into the main area of the bay, so the water wasn't moving as fast. Now, right before we got into Hell's Gate, sorry, on the left-hand side, there was some eddies and some calmer water. I did see some juvenile tarpon that were rolling in there, so that I made a note of that to check it out later. And after the water started moving and was ripping out of there, I also saw some larger tarpon, maybe about 50 or 60 pounds, rolling in the current. They were going after the bait of choice in the area, which were these little 2 to 3 inch pilchards. There wasn't much mullet around. The mullet that was there were the really big ones. They were, 12, 14 inches, and that really wasn't the bait source for them. All the predator fish in the area seemed to be keyed in on those pilchards. So when the water started moving, we concentrated on hitting these points up, the primary points and the secondary points that were in the area. I was able to catch a couple of snook as I set some drifts by there, and I was catching them on both the leeward and the current side. So yeah, while you're out there, check both sides of it. Wherever there was bait, there was the fish. In the back of this cove right here, there was a mud flat. At the bottom, say, third of the tide, when the water was at its lowest, at the base of this mud flat, the water was about a foot deep, and there was a bunch of redfish feeding on the pilchards that were gathered in the area. It was a pretty cool sight to see. As a matter of fact, when we were anchored up kind of watching the area, I noticed that there was redfish that were actually coming around the point to this mud flat. So it is a known area for the redfish to go. So bottom of the tide, this is definitely a good area. Also, in these larger coves, all those little small schools of pilchards that were swimming through there were getting blown up by these massive jacks. Matter of fact, I thought they were dolphin at first, but then you see that big forked tail come out of the water. You knew exactly where what it was, and it was quite the sight to see. Now, I didn't see any trout on this trip, but if I was looking specifically for trout, there's a big sandbar in the middle of the bay that part of it gets exposed during low tide. And it had a sharp drop off on the leading edge of it, and the tailing edge, it had a gradual slope. When I was going across this gradual slope on the way back to the bridge, I noticed there was a bunch of stingrays there was a bunch of smaller sharks, and there was a lot of birds on the exposed area of the sandbar. So this would be a great area to check out on a rising tide. Now, on a dead low tide, I probably would have pulled off a little bit, or even fished that sharp drop off on the leading edge of it for the trout. But we didn't wind up seeing any, and we didn't catch any. So with this information, if I was to put up a game plan or come up with a game plan to fish this area, say the next day, if I started at high tide, what I would do is I would go to the mouth of Hell's Gate, and in that eddy, I would start looking for those juvenile tarpon. Once the water started moving, I would start hitting all of these main points and these secondary points and fishing the trailing edge and the leading edge of the current side of these points, looking for snook. And there's a lot of points in the area, so you'd have plenty of area to check out. Now, on the bottom third of that tide, whenever it almost bottomed out, I would go back to that cove and I would look for those feeding redfish and hit that up for a little while. Now, if none of that worked out, there's definitely nothing wrong with catching those large jack in the middle of the bays on topwater. That would be a cool thing to do. So I hope this helped you out if you were thinking about fishing the area if you've never been here before, or if you've been here before and you might have struggled to find some fish. So if you're a local and you fish this area a lot, I would love to hear how you fish. If you see something different than what I saw, just put those in the comment below. As always, I appreciate you watching this video, and when you're out there, please pick up after yourself, and if you have to, please pick up after others. And until next time, keep those rods bent and those drags screaming. Thanks, bye, have a great day.